There are 18 islands sitting in the middle of the North Atlantic that most people have never thought about once in their lives. No famous landmarks, no World Heritage tourism. Just fog, cliffs, and grass. The Faroe Islands sit roughly halfway between Norway and Iceland, north of Scotland, in some of the most isolated water on Earth. You could fit the entire archipelago inside a mid-sized American city. The population is around 55,000 people. By every conventional measure, there is nothing here worth paying attention to. And yet, something keeps pulling serious researchers back to this place. Not the scenery, not the fish, something older, something buried. And the more you look, the harder it becomes to accept the official story of what this place is and where it came from. Start with the mountains. That sounds simple enough. Mountains are mountains. You've seen them. But go looking at the specific formations on these islands, and something feels immediately wrong. Mountains are supposed to be irregular. Erosion is chaotic. Geological processes don't produce symmetry. They produce jagged ridges and lopsided slopes and uneven faces worn down in random directions over millions of years. That's what mountains look like. But several of the formations on the Faroe Islands don't look like that at all. The first one is called Curvy, near the small village of Lara. From above, from a distance, from almost any angle, it has straight edges running down its sides, defined corners, faces that appear proportional to each other. The surrounding hills are irregular and chaotic in exactly the way natural hills should be. Curvy is not. The second formation is Vikartindur, near the town of Saxon. The summit of this structure appears stepped. Not rounded, not jagged, stepped. In the same configuration you find in the stepped pyramids of Mexico and Central America. The third is Villingardalsfjall, and if this is what some researchers believe it to be, it would be the largest structure of its kind ever documented anywhere on Earth, standing 841 meters above sea level. Over 2,700 feet. The surrounding landscape has a quality to it that's difficult to describe, but impossible to ignore once you've seen it. The fourth is Borðeyjarnes Mountain, near the town of Klaksvík. It has two distinct pyramid-shaped peaks sitting side by side, symmetrical, defined, unlike anything occurring naturally in the geography around it. Now there are about a dozen other hills on these islands with similar characteristics. At some point, the word coincidence stops doing the work we're asking it to do. And here's something worth sitting with. A building doesn't need to be ancient to become unrecognizable. Vegetation and accumulated soil can completely swallow a structure in as little than 10 to 15 years without maintenance. If these formations were constructed centuries ago and then abandoned, covered over by generations of moss and grass and earth, they would look exactly like this. That's not speculation. That's how organic matter works. The question isn't whether nature can hide a structure. It can. The question is, what's underneath? If you're finding this worth your time, a subscribe helps more people find this content. Every person who finds this channel helps keep the investigation going. Now let's keep going. The official history of the Faroe Islands begins remarkably late. The oldest document that mentions the islands by name is the Fereyinga saga, recorded in the 10th century, and only fragments of that have survived. According to the saga, the first settler was a pagan man named Grimur Kamben, who fled Norway to escape the rule of Harald Fairhair. That's the foundation. One man, one boat, 9th century. Before that, officially, nothing. Except that's not what the archaeology says. Excavations have found evidence of human settlement on the Faroes that predates the Viking arrival by hundreds of years. People were here before the Norse. The official account simply doesn't explain who they were or where they came from. Some sources suggest the first inhabitants were the Papar, a group of Irish monks who used the islands as a retreat. The islands supposedly converted to Christianity around the year 1000. Clean, tidy, simple. But then there's a 12th century text called the Historia Norwegiae, the history of Norway, and what it describes doesn't fit the tidy version at all. The history of Norway says the islands around Norway were originally inhabited by two distinct groups. The first were called the Petty, described as only slightly taller than pygmies, capable of miraculous feats of construction. They built towns in the morning and evening, but retreated into underground chambers at midday when their strength failed. The second group were called the Papai, described as dressing like priests, and their books, according to the text, suggested they had come from Africa and followed the Jewish faith. People from Africa following the Jewish faith, hiding in underground chambers in the North Atlantic, building towns at dawn and dusk. That is not a myth. That is from a 12th century official historical record. There are accounts from other research traditions of a now extinct race of small people in the Atlas Mountain region who converted between religions to avoid persecution, practicing one faith publicly and another privately. The description in the history of Norway matches those accounts in specific ways that are difficult to explain as coincidence. Now here's where the language becomes interesting. The native language of the Faroe Islands, Faroese, is closely related to ancient Germanic. Their second language is Danish. Old Icelandic and Faroese are essentially dialects of the same ancient Germanic family. That matters when you start looking at the mountain names. Kyrvi. That name could once have been Kirkvi, from the ancient Germanic root meaning holy temple. Kirk still means church in Scottish Gaelic, and Scotland is the closest major landmass to the Faroes. The sound fits, the meaning fits, and it fits in a way that pickaxe, an alternative proposed translation, simply does not when you're standing in front of a pyramid-shaped mountain that may have once been a structure. Vikartinder, near the town of Saxon. Saxon almost certainly derives from Saxon, the Germanic people. The name Vikartinder in ancient Germanic could translate directly as Holy Temple. The town near Kyrvi is called Leira, which in Faroese means to run. In Frisian, the old northern Germanic dialect, the word for flowing is closely related. The connections are consistent, and they keep appearing at the specific sites where the anomalous formations are located. That pattern is hard to set aside. Look at a 1747 map that shows Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands together. On that map, Greenland and Iceland are not shown as ice-covered. Where we find ice today, the map shows cities, cathedrals, castles, and fortresses. We've covered that in previous research on Greenland's buried history. On that same map, the Faroe Islands are labeled with place names corresponding to exactly the locations where the pyramid formations stand today. An island called Viðoy, which in Danish reads identically to the Frisian word meaning again, corresponds to the modern island of the same name. Wikipedia says the modern town name means woodland promontory. The Frisian linguistic evidence points somewhere else entirely. The modern explanation doesn't hold up when you follow the actual words. And then there's the name Faroe itself. The similarity between Faroe and the Germanic spelling of Pharaoh is difficult to ignore when you are simultaneously looking at pyramid-shaped mountains on the same islands. That may mean nothing, or it may mean exactly what it sounds like. Now here's the question that breaks the official timeline open. Why are there no pre-1700 maps that called this place the Faroe Islands? Before 1700, every map that marks this location calls it Friesland, sometimes spelled Friesland or Fryland or Fixland. Wikipedia categorizes it as a phantom island, an imaginary landmass. But a 1558 navigation chart by Niccolò Zeno shows Friesland as a densely populated and commercially active place, more developed than any of the surrounding islands on the same map. These were not decorative illustrations. Sailors staked their lives on these charts to cross open ocean. The argument some researchers make is straightforward. Friesland and the Faroe Islands are the same place. The Faroes are what remains after a cataclysm reduced a larger landmass to the smaller archipelago we see today. That's why pre-1700 maps show a different, larger island in the same location. The land wasn't imaginary, it was real, and then it was changed. We've seen this pattern before. Greenland's historical maps showed mountains and valleys and channels now buried under kilometers of ice. Antarctica appears on 1570s navigation charts covered in town names, marked as green and populated. Hyperborea showed an entire Arctic continent that no longer appears on any modern map. Friesland becoming the Faroes fits that same pattern exactly. Larger, inhabited, then dramatically reduced. Something happened. The Frisian people, who gave their name to Friesland, had a mythological tradition built around a figure called Fosit, also known as Forseti. The name in ancient Germanic simply means the leader. The modern German word for chairperson is Vorsitzender, almost identical. The Hall of Forseti was called Glitnir, meaning one that shines. It had pillars of gold and was roofed with silver, radiating light that was visible from great distances. If Friesland was the center of Frisian civilization, then this hall was located on what is today the Faroe Islands. Forseti was also said to have built temples as large as mountains, constructed from amber, copper, silver, and gold. Temples as large as mountains, in a place where mountains look suspiciously like pyramids. Two of the specific pyramid formations examined here have the sounds kir and tind in their names. Both of those sounds correspond directly to ancient Germanic words for temple or sacred structure. That may be coincidence, but it keeps surfacing at the same locations, in the same language family, pointing toward the same meaning. One more thread worth pulling. The Wikipedia article on the Frisian people links them to references in Beowulf, the Old English epic, and connects them to the Irish Fomorians, described in Irish mythology as a race of giants who emerged from beneath the earth. Giants, underground chambers. We keep finding the same cluster of elements across completely separate cultural traditions in this same stretch of the North Atlantic. At some point, that cluster stops being random. Now consider what happened in the 1980s and 1990s. For decades, oil and gas companies drilled extensively near the town of Lera on the Faroe Islands. They kept drilling for nearly 20 years. No commercial discovery was ever made. That is an extraordinarily long commitment of resources in a region that was supposed to be promising. What were they looking for? And what did they actually find? No public answer has ever been given. And below the surface of the islands today, there is significant infrastructure. Tunnels running from island to island have been constructed throughout the archipelago. Underground passages connecting separate landmasses. The stated purpose is transportation, but there is no documentation connecting any of this tunneling to archaeological investigation of the pyramid formations, or to any study of what lies beneath them. Those tunnels go somewhere. What they pass through on the way has never been discussed publicly. What can be said with reasonable confidence is this. The Faroe Islands sit on what historical maps consistently identified as a larger and more populated landmass. That landmass shows the same characteristics we found everywhere else in this investigation. Ancient maps depicting it as inhabited and detailed, modern geography showing something reduced and changed, a recorded history that begins far too late and leaves centuries unaccounted for, and physical formations on the ground that do not behave the way natural geography behaves. Whether those formations are pyramids in the traditional sense, or overgrown ancient structures slowly being reclaimed by the landscape, or something else entirely, the answer is sitting under centuries of accumulated moss and earth on those four hillsides. Unlike Greenland, where the answer may eventually emerge through ice melt, and unlike Antarctica, where the geography itself is changing, the Faroe Islands don't need a climate event to reveal what's there. A small team with ground-penetrating radar, permission to access the relevant land, and the willingness to actually look at Kyrvi, Vikartindur, Villingardalsfjall, and Bordojarnis Mountain could answer the question faster than any satellite ever will. Nobody has done that yet, at least not publicly. That absence of investigation is its own kind of answer. When the evidence is this consistent and this specific, and nobody with resources and authority moves to examine it, that silence is worth paying attention to.